Why would God create such a vast universe and only use one planet? 25, not one or two, 25 different characteristics of our universe are recognized as precisely fixed. If they were different by only a very slight amount, the difference would spell the end of the existence of any conceivable life. If the fusion of hydrogen used 50% of the energy potential, then we'd live in a world where you only have half a dozen elements. If that efficiency had been even greater, so it only used 6,000th of 1%, a proton could not be bonded to a neutron, which means that two hydrogen atoms could not form deuterium on their way to creating a helium atom. That would block off the route to forming helium, let alone deuterium. Therefore, the entire universe would be peopled entirely by hydrogen, nothing else. If it had been slightly less efficient and it used 8/1000ths of 1%, then all the protons would have fused as they condensed after the Big Bang. So hydrogen would never be formed. We'd never have stars. There'd be no light. There'd be nothing. In fact, there'd be no matter. Hi, everybody. We're now taking you to the episode 1 of the Quintology Files. Is our universe a deliberate creation, or is it a freak accident?
Right. So on our last episode, you mentioned that God created man, but you claim that that was misunderstood.
Yes, I think the conventional idea many people hold is that God created man. God created the earth and peopled it with mankind. But if you think for a moment, why would God create such a vast universe and only use one planet? That doesn't seem godly. We, as Homo sapiens sapien, are a relatively recent species to have emerged. The oldest example of our species dates back only 195,000 years. A little bit earlier than when I first started writing, but still less than 200,000 years. So, as the path of evolution is very clear, do we think that God invented us, or Homo sapiens, or Homo erectus, or Neanderthals, or chimpanzees, or gorillas? It's very difficult to be precise. If we look at it more from the perspective of what we find from the fossil record, we've now identified that the process by which our bodies manufacture hemoglobin, that's the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen, we find the identical coding in the genus of Amniotes. Now, these were the predecessor genus to both dinosaurs and mammals. The split between the sauropods that became the dinosaurs and the snapsids, amongst which descended mammals, that split occurred at least 312 million years ago. It would suggest that we've been evolving for at least that long, or in his wisdom, God cast around and used spare parts of coding from different species when assembling man. I don't think many theologians would subscribe to that one. But it does rather point out how evolution gives us information about our likely origins.
So what do you think God created?
Well, actually, I think a man and a woman who love each other, they can create a baby. Any life form can do creation. I don't think that's the big thing. I think it's the design of the species, the design of life. To me, God, or the ultimate intelligence that gave rise to the universe, was a designer, not a creator. Creation is something that flows from the design within the design parameters. As we touched upon, the way we have a system of stars, planets, and moons, that is the parameter, which eventually leads, or can lead in the right circumstances, to the natural creation of self-replicating organisms, or life.
So those who question God's attention, even love, doubt God exists.
That's a very valid question. For me, if you analyze the possibilities, you have to come down to one of two answers. Either everything that we can detect, not just that we can see, but that we can detect, is the result of complete random events, freak accidents, or there is a master design behind everything.
Right.
And I subscribe to the second camp. To me, there is evidence, irrefutable evidence, that there is a design. Therefore, there must be a designer.
I think Einstein would agree with that.
Yeah.
He said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Right.
A lot of people have criticized leading scientists as atheists because they didn't subscribe to religious dogma. But as we'll come to in later episodes, the foundation of a lot of Christian dogma is very weak and fragile. And you can have a belief system that shows, as I think we'll touch on today, indeed, absolute proof in the existence of an ultimate designer. When, for the want of a better name, I suggest the name for that is God. One thing I would mention, when I was a teenager, there was serious scientific discussion as to whether the physical laws that we have detected and measured on Earth, whether it's the same laws apply on other planets or in other galaxies. Thankfully, and it's a huge breakthrough, we now are pretty much convinced that the physical laws that apply here apply both across the universe, and therefore they apply across time. Because as we're looking across the universe, we're looking back in time. That is very, very convenient. The knowledge that, for example, water will mutate from liquid to gas at exactly 100 degrees centigrade if the conditions are identical. 1,000 millibars pressure at sea level, mean sea level. That will work anywhere in the entire universe. And that actually is a massive simplification. When we get into the physical laws, we do find some really surprising things. And I'm going to quote from another book, actually, not mine, written by a gentleman called Hugh Ross. And the book's title was Creation and Time. And he talks about the mathematical constants which are fixed to a precision way beyond any possibility of that being an accident. It is deliberate. And I'll quote from him, 25, not one or two, 25 different characteristics of our universe are recognized as precisely fixed. If they were different by only a very slight amount, the difference would spell the end of the existence of any conceivable life. To this list of 25 can be added another 38 characteristics that must fall within very narrow defined ranges for any form of life to exist. 3 of these characteristics of the universe must be defined to a precision of 1 part in 10 to the power 37 or greater. That is supernatural. Understanding these definitions and the explanations for these constants is not for the simple-minded. Unfortunately, it is extremely technical. I would certainly invite anyone interested to delve into the detail, and they'll be convinced. If you'll bear with me, I'll briefly explain in layman's terms, because that's all I understand, two of these constants, and I think they will blow you away. One goes by the simple term N. It's the ratio between the force of gravity and the positive and negative forces of a proton and an electron inside an atom. The ratio is a figure of 10 to the power 36. The force of gravity is that much weaker than the negative force and positive force of a proton and an electron inside an atom. That ratio is staggering. When you consider the physical universe, the number of stars, etc., it shows you how slowly gravity was able to gather a mass of atoms, hydrogen atoms, that was all that was there at the beginning, in order to crush them through its superior aggregate force and ignite a star to become a fusion reactor. If that ratio was only slightly smaller, life would be impossible. If we say that instead of it's 10 to the power 36, it's 10 to the power 33, that is actually 1,000,000 times less. And that means that the number of atoms that are gathered together before gravity can crush the atoms and fuse them will be that much smaller. So instead of having a star maybe the size of our sun, a star would be on average the size of our planet. And the consequence of that is that it would burn through all its fuel much, much faster. Instead of lasting 10 billion years, as our star will, it might last 10 million years. 10 million years in the life of a solar system, you barely get planets to assemble. There's no time for moons to be captured, for any terraforming or anything else. No life could exist at that stage. So if N was only 10 to the power 33, there's no chance of life. If the power was greater, then the average star would need to be that much bigger before gravity could overwhelm the internal structure of an atom. Stars would be incredibly long-lasting, and there'd be that much fewer of them. So the ratio seems to have been fixed at an ideal level, at least so far as we're concerned, sitting here in the luxury of our planet. The second constant I'd like to briefly explain is nuclear efficiency. This uses the symbol epsilon. And nuclear efficiency is the proportion of the innate energy trapped inside an atom that is used when it fuses to form the next element. Now, when two hydrogen atoms fuse to create one helium atom, it uses 7/1000ths of 1% of its energy potential. So that's 0.007 of its total energy is used, which is almost nothing. This has a huge benefit for mankind, because what it means is natural forces of stars burning fuel and eventually going supernova can use that energy to create a vast range of elements. We know that some are artificial and have very short lives, but we're getting towards around 200 different elements before the power, the energy potential in an atom is consumed. If the fusion of hydrogen used 50% of the energy potential, then we live in a world where you only have half a dozen elements. So you see the bonanza that a very efficient nuclear efficiency ratio provides to life forms across the universe. So it's like we have an enormous Lego set of different kinds of elements that we can then combine into an almost limitless number of compounds. The other factor is how precise that ratio is. This value of 7/1000ths of the potential of the energy contained in an atom, if that efficiency had been even greater, so it only used 6,000th of 1%, a proton could not be bonded to a neutron, which means that two hydrogen atoms could not form deuterium on their way to creating a helium atom. That would block off the route to forming helium, let alone deuterium. Therefore, the entire universe would be peopled entirely by hydrogen, nothing else. Grim world. If it had been slightly less efficient and it used 8/1000ths of 1%, then all the protons would have fused as they condensed after the Big Bang. So hydrogen would never be formed. We'd never have stars. There'd be no light. There'd be nothing. In fact, there'd be no matter. Because without hydrogen atoms, there is no matter. It would remain a universe purely of radiation as it was at the Big Bang. There's two examples there of extreme precision in the design. To me, without even looking at the other 53 or whatever they are, characteristics that are so precise, somebody did a lot of homework to design a world governed by, or a universe governed by, these incredibly precise constants. And that leads us into the title for the next episode. The design of the universe is biased. It's biased towards the creation of intelligent life. Thank you.